thing we must all be aware of.
Didn't I heard on the news that the Republicans filibustered the Don't Ask, Don't Tell ban, the effort to recall that. They filibustered it, but also what was in the bill I heard was a raise for members of the military. So that kind of shows me that they don't really, it doesn't seem like they care too much about the actual members of the military.
Well, they usually give an annual raise per se, like ranging between 2 to 5% raise on the entire pay scale. That's usually an annual thing every commander-in-chief, i.e. the President of the United States, gives. But the whole don't ask, don't tell policy is basically it's institutional discrimination against gay and the lesbian community within our military. I don't promote it. I think it's also a side of a larger domestic issue within our military, and I don't really have too much else to say except it's institutionalized discrimination, the policy itself. But it also takes away from the point of articles in the New York Times, like the increase of troops we've had in Afghanistan, correlating that with the amount of export of opium out of Afghanistan too, the drug trade that our government is basically involved with, if you connect the dots. You could look at Gary Webb's articles from the mid-1990s that stated the CIA with the Iran-Contra situation and down in Central America was bringing in drugs. This is all a continuous cycle that goes hand in hand with our military, not to mention the privatized military that's still running things, like in Iraq, for example. We are not leaving that country. We have 50,000 troops still left behind as a residual force. We have 72,000 contractors there, not to mention this equivocal amounts in Afghanistan, the expanding war into Pakistan and Yemen, all these things. The wars are just expanding over there, and that's why I bring back to the issue to demilitarizing our youth and our institutions at home so we could start to have an informed public. So even if they do decide to join the military, they will say, well, guess what? You know, I was reading my pocket constitution, and this just doesn't follow my orders. So if they understand the basis of their law and their orders, at least for that sake of the argument, then they'll at least be able to participate in their institution by asking questions what they're supposed to do.
Some people are born followers. They need that direction in their life. Nobody else can give it to them.
Right. I mean, there's a structure that's there in society to have people want to
offer them.
Right.
If you demilitarize, well, what then? What, is everybody just going to sit around and collect unemployment?
No. You'll have people that are mentally well and physically well to participate in their community and recapture our government that's been stolen by corporate interest. I mean, that's what my angle is on it, is to have these kids not even be involved in these illegal wars of occupation, because you can't win an occupation. Our military is designed to win a war. That's pretty obvious. We could do that very well as a military. Can't win an occupation. They learned that in Vietnam. They've learned it in all these other countries where we've gone over and occupied. You could see the same thing happening with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's just an occupation. Occupations are meant there for larger political and private interests that have nothing to do with the representation of the people of this country or any people that respect peace and prosperity and tranquility within their community. Does not want to live in an occupation. And it's easy for me to say that, but at least I got to leave the combat zone after my time was done. Those people over there have endured one of America's longest military campaigns ever in recorded history. And that's telling you something, you know. And these things, even the commanders, even McChrystal said in his farewell address last month that it's a political solution in Afghanistan and Iraq that we're facing, not a military one, because the military only does acts of aggression. That's what they're trained for. But getting back to the local levels, that's why the act of demilitarizing our youth is just bringing back a sense of their humanity, the things that this country stood for that were good.
We have a question from the audience.
Well, I've been very concerned about Blackwater and the contracted military. This frightens me. in the Second World War, there was an effort to have a coup against FDR by the corporate elites in our country. And the idea that they could now just call on Blackwater, and there's this huge military that's been hired out, it really alarms me. Add to that the fact that when they kept saying the number of Americans who died, they never were counting the people who were in these contracted military, right? I mean, that was never counted. And it's not ever said in the news that there's these people who are hired by us at pretty good salaries, I take it. And I just wondered if some of you could address this issue of this shift that has happened in the military in the United States with the Iraq and Afghanistan wars under Bush and Cheney.
Well, I think that doesn't that go back to what Eric was talking about, with recruitment? I mean, I think if they could recruit the numbers of people they needed to recruit, they probably wouldn't be hiring private corporations to do some of the work. But I think far more insidious, actually, than what you're talking about. And I think it's something that really doesn't seem to get addressed at all, except I was pleased to see by the Washington Post a couple of weeks ago. Nice to know that there's actually a newspaper in the country that's still doing some reporting. But is the incredible amount of money, $100 billion a year or so, being spent on Homeland Security and various associated agencies that are not really accountable. They're not really. You can't really question them because most of what they deal with is classified. And it's not even so much the secrecy of it, it's the extraordinary waste that seems to be going on in that particular branch of government, where you have massive departments in Homeland Security replicating exactly what's being done in the CIA, which is being done in the NSA, which is being done in the FBI, and they're replicating each other's work and not sharing information and wasting, tens and tens of billions of dollars, of taxpayers' dollars every year. And I think what surprised me about it was that it was the first I'd actually read about it. I mean, it's been going on for an awful long time. Obviously, it was given a huge push by Bush. But there seems to be a remarkable amount of waste, a remarkable amount of secrecy, a remarkable amount of inefficiency, and a remarkable amount of replicated work. And nobody, bar the Washington Post, seems to be talking about it. And I'm a little bit surprised about that. That seems to be much more insidious than what you're talking about. I mean, I take your point. I don't know enough about it to really argue with you, except that the military is at least relatively open. When somebody joins the military, they know what they sort of know what they're getting into. It's a kind of caveat emptor, buyer beware, right?
But
you're
you
going
have to
sign up.
understand, like military recruiters, though, they're not trained to be a career officer or a personal counselor of that sort. They're not going to facilitate all your needs. They don't even tell basic recruits that their whole contract, for example, is 8 years. For example, you'll sign up for a 4-year contract. Myself, I had a 3-year active duty, 1-year delayed entry, so a year prior, and then attached to that was 4 additional years as inactive ready reserve. But besides that, you're saying about the recruiting numbers. And Bush Sr., our president we had before Clinton, downgraded the military after the first Gulf War campaign and totally reduced the numbers and downsized the Army by several divisions and whatnot. And it's not so much, they've now used they've used a backdoor draft through the stop-loss program, which I was mentioning with the contract. So they've let guys that are in IR, they recalled them up or held guys from getting out past their active duty contract. And they've also hired private military, such as Blackwater, which has changed its name to Blackwater Worldwide, and U.S. Training Corps International. And they've done this incrementally since the inception of the global war on terror. And